call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and it's a pleasure to speak on, I guess, what is an important issue, but not an important piece of legislation. If that sounds somewhat contradictory, I think the fact that we're putting the cart before the horse here, in my view, Mr Speaker, and in speaking on Part 3, miscellaneous provisions, validation of irregularities, Mr Speaker, and I'll go and refer to Clause 69(5), and it is the New Zealand flag, and it's the reality here that we have not yet decided what the flag should be. So I'm putting before you one of the options that was certainly brought to my attention, and I guess if the flag is described here in 69(5)(3), that the New Zealand flag is the national flag of New Zealand for general use on land, then I guess the inclusion of a sea mammal is probably outside of it, Mr Speaker. And while that might seem a little too cute, the reality is that the interpretation of this piece of legislation and this part is really important and must reflect the objectives, I guess, of New Zealand having a flag. Because what it says in Part B there is the New Zealand flag, quote, is the proper national colours to be worn by all New Zealand government ships and by other such ships, etc. Mr Speaker, the point being that the colours that will be chosen for the flag, Mr Speaker, will end up being the colours that each and every New Zealander should identify with. And I'm not sure what they should be, Mr Speaker. I think black's a good start. I put before you again this quite innovative flag design here, Mr Speaker. I don't think it's one of the 40 being put up. I haven't, to be fair, gone through and had a detailed look at all 40. But it does cover a few things. And for the current national government, I'd suggest it's a perfect representation of what's about to happen, because we have the whale above the water with the kiwi and the lamb on it, about to do a big dive, Mr Speaker, about to do a big dive, as is this economy, taking with it the sheep and the kiwi. Mr Speaker, it's a perfect representation of the national government in power, because the national government's taking this economy in a deep, deep dive because it's ignoring all the warning signals, Mr Speaker, that we are facing a recession, particularly through dairy, for some time, Mr Speaker, probably longer than the whale even can hold its breath. Mr Speaker, I come back to to Part 3 here. It is important that there is widespread support for this legislation and all the details included in this. I don't think it's the case, Mr Speaker. I think what we're doing here is, or the government's trying to do, is pass through a piece of legislation that does not have the full support of Kiwis, that does not have the support of New Zealanders who are looking forward and who are asking the questions around the colours that should represent us, around the flag design that should represent us, Mr Speaker, and indeed, if the government's so determined to go ahead, then put up the flag and then come to us with the legislation that may allow us to utilise the flag in the way it should be intended, to ensure that if we insist that the national colours, as stated here in Part 3, proper national colours to be worn by all New Zealand government ships. Mr Speaker, if the flag design is not the right one, and the government, as it's done in most areas, just bulldozes through with its intention, Mr Speaker, we're all lumbered with that, as is the Navy, as are New Zealand ships, Mr Speaker, and as is every part of our economy. Mr Speaker, this is not a good piece of legislation. And Labor is raising concerns that I hope the Minister will get up and answer. I hope he'll get up and explain himself why the national government's determined to push ahead with this, waste the money, come up with a design and a new focus that the vast majority of New Zealanders seem unnecessary and certainly untimely, Mr Speaker, because we have bigger issues that the government should be, and this House should be focusing on, not just a flag design. And perhaps the Minister can explain to me why we shouldn't put this up as a design, given that it is such a great representation of the national government as it is at the moment, taking this economy into the deep, deep dive, and it's going to leave a lot of Kiwis, indeed, and a lot of sheep drowning, Mr Speaker, because they don't have the proper support.
Ian Lees Galloway.
Very much, Mr. Chair.